We are talking about performance management in today's lecture. As we have seen in our earlier lectures that one of the important aspects of managing is performance management, which will eventually result into better results for the organization in terms of whatever we may call it, competitive advantage or survival and growth. This relates to our earlier lectures. Success of an organization depends to a great extent upon its people. Peter Drucker has recognized the enormous importance of management of people as resource in his book, The Practice of Management. That is his book, The Practice of Management. It is being increasingly realized that the ultimate implementation of management strategies comes through people working in the organization. This is what we have discussed as an important aspect of management, the human resources. So, the fundamental function of management functions of management like planning, organizing, decision making, controlling and motivating all have to be done by people and for people involved in it, isn't that? And so, this realization has tremendous impact on the overall management thinking, and this has changed the interpretation of the concept of management in the recent years, giving most importance to the management of human resources in organizations. Every employee has crystallized set of needs, values, ways of perceiving the world and the personality which brings him to the place of work. So, a mix of the individual characteristics of the organization and characteristics of the job, what we have discussed in our earlier papers, in fact earlier lectures. So, this individual who has come as a performer is not a raw mold. Many times we assume that he comes raw, but actually he tries to fit his psychological makeup with the climate of the organization, and the fact that this psychological characteristic influences his behavior suggests that the job behavior and his motivation to job performance will also be influenced by these characteristics. In general, productivity of an organization depends upon two major set of variables: employees' job performance and the technological factors including equipment, method, job design, the raw material, etc. Disregarding technological considerations, the job performance of a worker depends primarily on employees' ability and motivation to perform. One of the very early studies by Gagne and Fleischmann, they suggested that human performance is almost any anything in the human performance could be increased through motivation. That's the whole idea. So there is no shortcut to human performance. Human resource forms an important asset of an organization, and ultimately the success of an organization depends on the performance of its people. An organization's long-term success in meeting its strategic objectives depends on the ability to manage people, their performance, and ensure that performance measures are inconsistent with the organizational goals. Okay? They are consistent with organizational goals. So, traditional performance measurement most often measures performance in isolation of the organization's business strategies. But now we have accepted that performance has to be linked to the strategies of the organizations. So, in this section, in this lecture, we are trying to discuss the performance management in terms of why it is important for us to study performance management as students of management, and how it is related to other processes. When an employee joins an organization and he is selected, the next behavior or process that occurs is the socialization. The person gets adjusted, gets socialized in the organization, and then comes his performance in terms of his motivation and performance. And this motivation and performance, whatever he has done, will then lead to performance appraisal and the performance outcomes. So, these aspects, the motivation and performance, performance appraisals, performance outcomes, and in fact the performance we can say documentation, all these will come under the performance management broadly. So, we have to in fact every organization today has to keep a very close sort of observation on this, and some organizations are also using the computer based strategies for monitoring performance of people in many organizations, also in India now. So, when we look at performance of an individual or people, the factors which are related to performance are their involvement, their competency, the business strategy of the organization, the reward system, or we can also extend it to reward and punishment system, even though we will never sort of suggest punishment as a real policy, and the use of technology. So, performance management involves thinking through various facets of performance, identifying critical dimensions of performance, planning, reviewing and development, and enhancing performance, and of course, the related competencies for a particular job. Performance management involves goal setting, performance appraisals, a reward system that align the members' work behavior and work strategy, including the employee involvement and workplace technology. This is what I was trying to show in that kind of a chart. that what is the meaning of performance, and I have discussed that also a little bit. So, the review of organizational roles to associate preferred organizational results in terms of units of performance, that is quantity, quality, cost, to name a few. There may be some other other strategic parameters, but here we are talking about these three mainly, which are commonly done in most of the organizations. And these will also result into the desired goals or desired results, you can say. Ensure that results directly contribute to the organizational results. Weigh and prioritize the results. Identify and measure to evaluate the results achieved. Identify standards of evaluation. Document a performance plan including desired results and the measures and standards. Conduct ongoing observations and measurement to track performance. Exchange ongoing feedback about performance. Conduct a performance appraisal. If the performance meets the desired performance standards, then reward performance. If performance does not meet the desired results, then develop and update the performance development plan, whatever you would like to do in terms of in terms of this development, maybe a training schedule or whatever what you want to do. Performance management is an integrated process of defining, assessing and reinforcing employees' work behavior and outcomes. You understand the word reinforcing? Reinforcing perhaps would mean that whenever they are performing better, you have to give them some positive reinforcement, like you give either a reward or pat at the back or maybe some other incentives, could be financial at times. And no reinforcement, that means the performance is going on just as a routine way. So, if you are really wanting to make the performance better, we should reinforce that behavior by a simple pat at the back actually matters, even if you are not wanting to give any financial incentives. Okay, even your smile as a manager perhaps will matter there. So, reinforcement has great we can say psychological power, because performance management occurs in a larger organizational context. At least 3 contextual factors determine how these practices affect performance. These are business strategy, workforce technology and employee involvement. We have discussed some of these earlier. So, the desired results, as we can say that the desired results will be individual based and the organization based. If you look at some of the management theories, you will find that some authors have said that the best management would be which can perhaps integrate the individual and the organizational goals. Well, it may not be possible all the time, but that is a very ideal situation perhaps if we could do that. So, in terms of desired result, the person should be happy, the organization should be happy, and both should be willing to perhaps design a better work system. So, when we are talking about the whole process of performance, it consists of a number of factors. These factors, some of these I am listing here: job specific task proficiency, non-job specific task proficiency, written and oral communication proficiency, demonstrate efforts, maintain personal discipline, facilitate peer and team performance, supervision leadership, leadership style at the place of supervisory role, management and administration. These are some of the factors which we need to consider, and some of these in fact we have already dealt with in some of our earlier lectures. So, we move on. Dimensions of performance: obviously output or result dimension, that is considered as one of the most important factor in performance management. Then the input dimension is also there, time dimension is there, then focus dimension, quality dimension, cost dimension. These are the factors. So, what we have talked about? We have talked about the quality, we have talked about the cost, we have talked about the focus that the organization might have for that particular work requirement, and of course, the individual dimension and the quality and quantity dimension. So, there are many dimensions of work performance which the organization will look into. In fact, one of the studies that we conducted in the industrial sector in Faridabad, we found that quality and quantity, these were the two parameters which were the main dimensions of performance evaluation in most of the industries at the level of skilled workers. And some industries also added the behavioral aspects, the behavioral dimensions, the behavior with the peers, behavior with the supervisors and so on. And then we move on to talk about that many other industries have looked at many other parameters which will relate to, in addition to the work and other parameters which we have discussed, the other parameters like innovation, creativity and so on. We will just move on to that. So, the performance is what is expected to be delivered by an individual or a set of individuals within a time frame. What is expected to be delivered could be stated in terms of the results of efforts, task and quantity, with specification of conditions under which it could be delivered. So, we have to see that what exactly we have to deliver, and so the performance of the candidate whose performance is being planned, analyzed and assessed, that also becomes important. So, who manages this performance? Obviously, when we are looking at the performance, who manages this performance, that is another question which we are going to discuss also. in addition to certain captions, I am going to give you again an idea about one of the research studies that we had conducted. So, the performance management is a continuous process. Appraisals are the activities which are taken periodically, and management is a dynamic process, while appraisals are the static processes. We have discussed what we mean by static and dynamic in a subject like this, okay, in one of our earlier lectures. Dynamic, where the other factors will be continuously affecting a particular phenomenon. Okay, and that is what we will mean by dynamic in this situation. So, the appraisals are part of performance management. Here let me give you an idea about the study that I was just now referring to. There, who does appraisal? We conducted a survey of some of the Indian industries, and we found that typically the survey was done by the immediate boss. Only in some industries the immediate boss and then perhaps his superior person, two persons did that appraisal. But then as we are coming to discuss, maybe that we are going to discuss also just today, that when we are looking at the performance appraisal, in this data or the information comes from many sources. So, we are not really looking for just one person who is judging you, because possibility of biases may be there. So, these appraisals which are part of the performance management system, these are feedback systems which involve the direct evaluation of individuals or work group performance by supervisor, manager or peers. So, most organizations have some kind of a evaluation system that is used for performance feedback, pay administration, and in some cases counseling and perhaps developing employees. So, when we are looking at the performance management, it does not end with only the quality and the cost of the product or the quantity of product or something of that kind. It goes on with a developmental perspective, it goes on to the counseling and developing process and trying to also give you feedback. So, the feedback is an inbuilt inbuilt aspect of the performance management system. A survey of more than 500 firms found that 90% used performance appraisals to determine merit pay increases, 87% used to review the performance, and 79% used it as the opportunity to set goals for the next period. So, there are many evidence in fact which indicate that organizations do a poor job of the employee appraisals. A lot of literature has also suggested that. And one of the studies also found that 32% of the managers surveyed rated their performance appraisal process as very ineffective. When we asked the managers, that was the result. So, innovations have been made in the enhancing in the whole process, enhancing employee involvement, balancing organizational and employee needs, and increasing the number of raters. When I said who is doing the evaluation, I mean the raters, who is doing the rating or who is the judge in that process. So, the number of judges or number of raters we mean here. So, newer forms of appraisals are being used by many companies like AT&T, we have Raytheon, we have many other companies, Intel, and so many other companies. I have just listed a few names here which are there available in the literature. But there are many other companies. The list could be very, very long. So the performance appraisal, this refers to those procedures which are used to evaluate the personality of the performer and the potential of the group members. So now we are actually expanding our understanding of performance management from a simple quality and quantity based approach to the cost based approach, then the appraisal based approach, the feedback based approach, and how complicated the whole system gets when we are trying to look at the employee needs and the employee personality there, which more or less, we are finding that in the earlier literature that was not the case with most of the companies, and we can say were sort of neglected. But now we are finding that there is an integrated system of performance management, perhaps most of the industries are trying to adopt. Evaluation is different than judgment, the former being concerned with performance, the latter with the person. Are you getting this point? We talk about evaluation, we talk about judgment. Even though we are doing some judgment while evaluating as well, but there is some difference between the two, performance and the when we are talking about performance and when we are talking about the judgment. While evaluation deals with achievement of goals, judgment has undercurrent of some personal kind of attack, some personal attitudes, and likely to evoke some kind of a resistance. Resistance in the person who is there, to judge you. Now, if we look at a very, very brief history of performance appraisal, we find that although the interest in the use of performance appraisal, this has increased over past 30 years or little more. The practice of actually formally evaluating employees, this existed centuries ago. This is because ever since there is a work situation, there is a formal work situation, the performance evaluation is inevitable. You have to, at the end of that performance, you have to say good or bad, and that was the time. So, ever since the work is there, we had been doing some kind of evaluation. So, in the 1900s, some subjective evaluation began, which of course remains in many organizations even today. But most of the organizations have gone quite objective, taking the subjective parameters as well, but designing a very scientific way of performance management. 1940s, towards 1940s, the increased psychometric sophistication took place. All of you understand the word psychometric. Psychometric is the measurement of psychological measurements using psychological testing, and psychology as a subject, when it became very scientific, maybe some of you do not have any exposure to psychology as a subject, but in our earlier lectures, when we were talking about the recruitment, selection and training, we have discussed about psychometrics. Maybe you can look back those lectures for this reference, but for now psychometric is psychological measurement which is done using certain instruments, and there are number of methods of psychometric measurement. So, this actually got developed after both the world wars have actually made contributions, but towards the Second World War, close to that, we were finding a lot of psychological measurements did develop. Okay. So 40, 45, that is the time roughly. Okay. In 1950s, the management of objective, we started talking about management by objectives, and the whole theory of management of objectives and management by objectives, this MBO process that was introduced, and we started the performance evaluation using the MBO process. In 1960s, we have the new technique that we evolved, we call it BARS, behaviorally anchored rating scales. This we are using in most of the organizations even today, and this introduction was during the 1960s. Then 1970 to 1990, the hybrid system approaches began, and then we started using many approaches at the same time. So, I can say that multiple measurement approach, we can use that word, began. And so, the components of performance appraisal then became very sort of organized, and we can say the assessment by reporting officer and sharing the rating results with the appraisee to arrive at the mutually agreed upon ratings, that became one of the important component. Then performance counseling became another component to help the individuals to learn from their seniors and to improve in their performance, which were not there so organized before this. Then review by the reviewing officers, development actions by HRD departments, delinking delinking appraisal systems from the performance and reward. Because if you really want people to develop positively, then we have to do the appraisal and give the feedback, so that the person has the opportunity of making those corrections and develop. So, looking positive in that sense. But if every time we say that there will be a reward if you are developing, perhaps then it becomes a very routine kind of activity, and people will not learn for the sake of learning, or people will not develop for the sake of their overall personality development or the development of attitude. Because when you are you are working, it is a matter of attitude, you develop through the attitudes. So, you will not do that, you will only look forward to that I have done this, so I should get this award. So, there is a difference between the two, and so we should try to de-link these two. Not that the reward should not be given, but reward should not be contingent upon each little improvement that the person has done. Okay, so we have to see that how much of reward and what type of reward, even that is very much important in this, whether a financial reward or a non-financial reward, perhaps which may be much better. The non-financial reward could be much better. We have seen that also in one of our earlier lectures, that the rewards could be of different types. The rewards and incentives could be financial or non-financial, and their impact that we had discussed in one of the earlier lectures. So, the objective of performance appraisal, when we move on to say that these are providing basis for these may provide basis for many things, including promotion, transfer, termination, and as a tool for career promotion. So, these will also enhance the employee effectiveness, identify employee training and development needs. We have discussed in our section on training that every employee perhaps has some special training need, and if organization really wants that the person should develop his or her skill and motivation, then the need is to identify the training needs and then give him that training. So, through the appraisal we can also do that. Then aiding in designing training and development programs. We have also seen in, I am just trying to link this lecture to one of the earlier lectures that we had done on the training and selection and training of employees, because next to that perhaps comes the performance appraisal, even though the processes that we have discussed in between are much more important. And so, I am trying to link this to the training, our discussion on training. So, if we have to design training programs, then obviously the data that we have generated through the appraisal systems, this is going to help us in the development programs. Alienation. Do you understand the meaning of alienation? See, you have motivation, you have involvement, you get involved in your work and try to devote so much time, you get committed in your work, and every manager would like that you should be a person who is involved and committed in whatever you do. But the opposite of that, almost we can say that the person is alienated, who is perhaps not interested, withdrawn from the work situation. What do? He is your employee. You have to give him chance of improvement before you decide something more serious. So, if you are doing appraisal and giving him proper feedback, giving him counseling, there is a possibility of removing work alienation. Then also discontent. We would like people to be happy at the place of work, very much contented. But sometimes it may so happen that some people have discontent. So, through the appraisals, we may be able to manage the discontent of people. Then developing interpersonal relationships. The interpersonal relationship is extremely important for any kind of organization, because it gives you personal satisfaction as well as it gives you the team spirit, it gives you better work motivation. We do not work alone. Whenever we are at the place of work, we are talking to people, we are discussing our technical issues with others. Sometimes seniors will advise us on so many things. So, if we are not having the interpersonal relationship, healthy interpersonal relationship, I am trying to say, then maybe problems for the organization. So, using appraisal system also for developing better work groups, there is a possibility. Performance appraisals also aid the wage administration, developing scientific basis for reward allocation, wage fixation, and perhaps the raises and the incentives. So, this is the personal functions, the personal department has to do that, and sometimes we are just doing that with factors like time promotion, just so many years and so many increments and things like that. But performance appraisal can help us in this decision. Time is one important factor, but in addition to that there are a number of other factors. The quality of work the person is doing, how much the contribution the person is doing to the organization. So, there are a number of factors which can be seen through the performance appraisal system, and so that it can help the organization in this way also. Then you can also exercise certain controls over certain activities when you are doing exhaustive the performance appraisal system. And of course, as we have discussed, it can improve your communication, the organizational communication I mean, and determine overall approach to performance appraisal includes some of these following factors which I am going to list now. What are the objectives of introducing performance appraisal? Our earlier discussion has given us an answer to this question. So, if you are actually designing a performance appraisal system, you should be very clear what are the objectives that you would like to pick up for your performance appraisal system. What benefits are anticipated, including the performance appraisal for promotion and other things. What other benefits you feel should be expected by the organization? What are the main features of the approach of performance appraisal in your case? Where and how should performance appraisal be introduced, at what level? At this senior level, junior level, middle level, or in the manufacturing department, or in the marketing department, or where do you really want the appraisal to be introduced first, or in all sections in your organization? Then you have to decide who will be covered in the performance appraisal, decide whether the same approach should be adopted at each level. We are talking about the dimensions to design a performance appraisal system for your organization. You can set up a project team, define roles of the human resource department, because when you are doing this performance appraisal, obviously in your organization that is the department which will design and analyze and perhaps give you all the feedback and maybe some follow up. So, we have to define what role they are going to do. Then decide whether to use outside consultants, because many of the outside consultants also help the organization. For many reasons, some organizations prefer outside consultants because they believe that if their own managers are doing the appraisal process, this may not come out to be a very good activity, because I guess they fear that there may be some kind of a mindset or some kind of a bias or something of that kind. I recollect that once, in fact number of times I have gone, but once very recently, one of the IT industries, they invited me to become their consultant to do the appraisal for all more than perhaps 2000 employees they have in many different offices all over India. And there when we were doing that, the form that was given to you, we had asked them to put that in a box, because I couldn't go personally to all the units, and perhaps they were not feeling that comfortable in handing over the whole paper to their officer. So, we had put a box, everyone was putting there in a box, and then all the boxes came to me. I analyzed everything, I got everything into a computer software, then I analyzed it and then prepared the report. it wasn't really the report for the individuals per se, but these were the reports for the whole organization. Okay. But it is possible. In this particular one, I was talking about the overall appraisal in terms of organization development. But it is possible to also give the individual feedback in the same process. So, that was one experience, very recent experience that I have had. This is as a consultant. Then we define the performance management process and documentation. Documentation becomes very important, how we are presenting, what are we presenting. Sometimes in the performance appraisal documentation for the individuals, it may lead to the counseling and development opportunities. For the departments and for the organization, maybe we need that so many people are dissatisfied, so many are satisfied, so many are innovative, so many are not in favor of any kind of innovation in terms of quality, quantity, awareness, cost reduction. So many aspects are there. So, we can do that analysis, and in documentation it could be a very formal documentation with all kinds of tables and graphs and other things. So it becomes a very scientific report if you are looking at the performance management for the whole organization or for the department, or for that matter for the individuals. But the individuals which will not really put in a meeting or in a discussion. That's only for the individual and the organization to take care of that, and for any kind of a any other kind of a further promotion or whatever, as we have discussed now. But for the organizations, from the organization's point of view, we can present that kind of a document to others. So, the pilot test we do, then plan the implementation program. All of you understand what is a pilot test? Do you? Pilot test, whenever we want to do any research activity or any scientific activity, we want to conduct a small study before we take up the final study. So, pilot test is a replica of the main study, okay? And first we do that, and we see the modalities, the difficulties, the time factor and other things, and then we redesign our final study and go on. So, that is how, it's like a pilot car. You understand now? Okay. So, the improved performance throughout the organization, that is another issue. That the example that I was giving you, that was about the improved performance all over the department. And then the creation of culture of continuous improvement and success. Even this was an objective of that study which I was involved with. Conveyance of message that people have in mind and which are valued by people. And with all these, we come to our discussion on the pitfalls and problems of performance appraisal system. When we design a performance appraisal system, we have number of pitfalls, and which we have to really take care of. So, now let us see the few pitfalls we are going to discuss on the performance appraisal system. We have sometimes the shifting standards in the performance appraisal system. When we are looking at the performance appraisal system, there may be different rater patterns. There are raters. When we have discussed, the rater means we have the people, those who are actually the judges, those who are actually doing the appraisal, rater when we say. So, different raters pattern might make some impact on negative impact on the performance appraisal system. Then we have the central tendency issue. central tendency issue you understand. Here that means the rater has a tendency to rate everyone with the average uh, say performance standard. So, if you have a 5-point scale, most of the people are put at the at point 3. So, that kind of a tendency the rater might have, which will mean not much, because we cannot really take out much from that. So, but then that happens whenever we have this rating system. Then the first impression, we all know that impression management is something that's a new field of management coming up, impression management, and we cannot deny this fact that the first impression makes an impact. But if a judge or the rater is good in the process of rating, then the possibility is that the first impression he could keep aside and look deeper into the whole process. So, first impression sometimes might motivate the person to make a wrong kind of a rating or judgment. That possibility is there. So, this is a pitfall in the whole appraisal process. So, in other words, what we are trying to discuss just now is that if you are designing a performance appraisal system, what factors you have to keep in mind. So, what is the latest behavior that might also affect your perception at that point, and the halo effect might also affect you at that particular point of time. Then there is a horn effect which also might affect you at that particular time. Then stereotyping might also affect you at that time. This is a bias, some kind of a bias. Then the spillover effect, whatever you have done earlier and now, that also might affect you at this time. And a work culture not so conducive to give and receive proper feedback, that might also affect you at the time of performance appraisal. So, lack of appreciation about the philosophy and the benefits of performance feedback, that may also affect you as the manager in charge of performance appraisal. So, if you are doing that, perhaps it would be a good idea that you also have some idea, some sort of enlightenment about the philosophy and the benefits of performance feedback. Okay, so in other words, what we are trying to suggest is that even the manager or the rater who is in charge of doing this has to be ready for it, isn't that? So, even mentally and also by the learning process, one has to be ready for this role. Then the lack of willingness of supervisor or top management in adopting this practice. Sometimes, say if you go to a very small tiny industry, or I can say that older generation industry, where things worked without all this, people generally have lack of willingness to accept some of these practices which are rather modern in organizations. But these become necessary because today we have lot of competition and no more those traditional management strategies are working. So, we have to adopt to the newer systems, and sometimes there is lack of willingness to adopt to some of these practices. As a result of that, they go on with the older systems. So, but this is a pitfall, and in the long run the organization might suffer because of not doing the modern appraisal practice in their organization. Now, also some of the pitfalls are related to factors like fears and apprehensions about the use of performance feedback outcomes. People are sometimes, not very much forthcoming with the performance feedback outcomes, because they fear that what others will think and what this person will think, and they may think bad about me. Okay, so what strategy should I use for giving this feedback? So better not give this feedback. But feedback is always good for the person if that is a very healthy feedback and if it is given in a positive way. We do not have to give a feedback in a very negative way. It has to be a negative thing also could be spoken in a very positive way. So, there is nothing to really fear or be apprehensive about giving these feedbacks, because that is inevitable part of a performance appraisal system, and every manager has to gear up to take up also this this role and responsibility. Now, the how much confidential you have to keep this feedback, that is also another important aspect. Do you really want to keep the system confidential? Well, yes, you do not have to make it very public, yet not confidential from the person whose system has to be actually appraised. So, the interference sometimes we may find from the trade unions in case of the lower level employees. We have seen in our earlier discussions that the trade unions are there and they are actually making impact on the employees. Then the lack of perhaps proper system and procedure, that also may be a feedback. Lack of accountability. These are some of the factors that we have which are the pitfalls in the whole process of performance appraisal system. In our next lecture, we will begin with some of these pitfalls and continue discussing performance management system in some organizations, and I will also give you some idea about some research studies and the results that we have done.